Carney's pledge to strengthen Canada's economy through these projects happens in the midst of an ongoing trade war with the U.S. One northern security expert says Carney is trying to create a sense of excitement and momentum. But he says the 5 projects announced on Thursday won't do it. I spoke to Ken Coates earlier to get his take on the announcement and what the North should expect. Thanks so much for being here with me.
Delighted to do so.
So what was your first thought when you saw that list of 5 projects?
Underwhelming, to be honest. Those projects have all been in discussion for more than half a decade, if not longer. They've almost all gone through most of the approval processes. They're sort of 75, 80% of the way down the line. So basically, it's like announcing yesterday's news. The government's trying the best it can to find projects it can move forward on. It wants to give a sense of momentum and excitement, but this won't do it. It actually is pretty much more of the same and not all that exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the federal government's reasoning for choosing these projects as it stated it, was because they were the furthest along and they had the biggest chance of success, these 5 projects. So you're saying that's not enough. We have to get something that's a little bit newer down the road faster.
So it's an interesting question because I think, first off, this is a repackaging of earlier announcements. All these different things have been announced or discussed widely for a long time. And what the government's trying to do is to give a sense that Canada is open for business, it's open for investment, and it's going to deal with regulatory overburden, which is one of the worst in the world. And we're going to move things along. We're going to get down to business. And it's, if I was an investor, if I was a banker, if I was in an Indigenous group, I wouldn't be all that convinced because these are projects that are already on the books. And they've had lots of conversations, so it doesn't really mean much is new.
Let's talk about this Arctic security corridor that has been discussed much by the federal government, by people in the territories. Were you surprised that that project didn't make this first cut?
I'm not surprised. I'm delighted it's on the second line because there's a lot more work to be done. And there's a lot of consultations with the communities. This project again has been on the books for quite a while. The Inuit in the western Nunavut have been proposing this kind of a project for quite some time, and running up against all sorts of barriers and a lack of investment and things of that nature. And so it's a classic example of that second list where they're saying, okay, let's take a closer look at it. Let's give some encouragement to investors and see if we can get it going. But just to use one example of a serious question that's been raised, even with that new road, most of that road is really going to be an ice road. For parts of the winter, because you can't build all that many bridges, you can't build all that many crossings of rivers and roads and lakes. So there's some really big technical questions of whether, in fact, this will actually be viable. And we have to answer those questions first. We've spent a lot of money in Canada over the years building roads and building railways and new projects that actually didn't lead to very much. And I think it's really important this time around the government not get overly excited about things because they look good on PowerPoint presentations. There's some real good hard work behind this project. I think it has a great potential, but we have to answer some serious questions first. So I think what the government's doing by putting it on the second list is saying this is sort of not a red light saying no, not a green light saying yes, but a sort of yellow light saying proceed with caution.
I mean, the North has a lot of infrastructure needs. Some are pretty basic when we compare ourselves to the South and what the people in southern provinces have. Do you think this big focus on these so-called nation-building projects will get us what we need in the North?
No, I don't actually. And although you sort of have to applaud sort of the effort. I mean, the nation building is a sort of a response to President Trump. And it's the idea that somehow we're going to rebuild a Canadian economy and reposition a Canadian economy and do something quite dramatically different that will actually save us from sort of the Trump-inspired tariff chaos that's about to hit the southern economy. So we started with this idea of national projects. Virtually none of those projects are national projects. The one that comes closest is the one in Churchill, Ontario, which again is on the second list, the sort of let's look at this more deeply sort of project idea. That one actually potentially links up northern Alberta, even northeastern British Columbia, to the Oat, to the Hudson Bay, and to European markets. It could help the farmers on the prairies. That one looks and sounds like something of a national project. And in fact, the descriptions of them now said exactly like they did in the early 20th century when they talked about building the Port of Churchill in the first place. Most of these things are worthy regional projects. And they're worthy regional projects that have a good potential to add some economic opportunity in certain locations. But I think the North is not going to be supercharged by this. Canada's economy is not going to be supercharged by this. And some major questions remain unresolved. The major one that I have is I'm not sure what those big national project would be. You know, there's no Trans-Canada Highway. There's no equivalent of the Canadian Pacific Railway. There's no equivalent of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Those are the kind of projects that we're nation building. These are sort of good local regional economy building activities. Nothing wrong with them, but we hold our excitement back quite a bit and not just sort of follow the government's logic. Government's trying to make political points. I don't mean in a partisan way. They're trying to sort of say to Canadians, we've got your back. We're going to push forward really aggressively. This is not very aggressive. It's not very dramatic. Certainly from the northern point of view, the only one is the Arctic Security Corridor that's sort of on that list. The northerners must be a little left out.
All right, we'll leave it there. Ken, thank you so much for your time today.
You're more than welcome.